Welcome to another episode of Team Anywhere, where CEOs, leaders, and experts at building teams,
companies,
organizations,
and amazing cultures share how to lead from anywhere in the world. I'm your co-host on the East Coast, Ginny Bianco Mathis.
And I'm your co-host on the West Coast, Mitch Simon. And we invite you to join us to Team Anywhere. Today, we interview an accomplished entrepreneur, leader, and CEO of Aquila Capital Partners, Mark Watson. Mark shares that the key to success in a distributed work environment is to appreciate that when your employees are remote, it's important that they have clarity of the vision and clarity for the progress towards that vision. KPIs must be front and center. Since we're not physically together, our conversations must be tight. They must be outcome-based. Yes, we definitely must make time to build trust and team. However, to have results-based conversations, let's not focus on what we're doing. Let's spend the bulk of our time on how to get close to the outcome. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Team Anywhere. I'm your co-host, Mitch Simon, on the West Coast, and I've got my amazing co-host, Dr. Ginny Bianco Mathis, on the East Coast. And in the middle, yes, in the middle of the country, what? In the middle of the country, we have on the podcast business leader and CEO of Aquila Capital Partners, Mark Watson. So, Mark, how are you today?
I'm doing great. You know, what a difference a year makes. A year ago, we were trying to figure out what the new normal would be, and now we're trying to figure out what the new normal is again a year later.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing. And guess what? Last year and this year, nobody knows. So there's no difference at all. Tell us a little bit about Aquila Capital Partners, why you founded it, and what you've learned in being a successful leader.
Well, I founded Aquila more than 20 years ago when I'd been an entrepreneur and an investor, but I'd also been an operator, having been part of a management team to take a company public in the early 90s, which we then sold in the late 90s. And I was thinking about, what I wanted to do next. And I thought it would be both rewarding and exciting to do something a little different, but still entrepreneurial. And so I thought about helping entrepreneurs build their businesses. And what I thought was missing from a venture business model was bringing both financial and intellectual capital to the table. And so I was thinking about it from the viewpoint of entrepreneurs helping other entrepreneurs build their businesses. And it's been kind of fun. I've had a chance to do a lot of that over the last 20 years. Certainly the last year and a half, I've really been doing a bit of that. And one of my portfolio companies, I think he summed it up really well. He said, Mark, we're really good at taking ideas and turning them into a business, sort of. And he goes, I'll say that's like going from 0 to 1. But you know how to go from 1 to 10, and your colleagues at Aquila know how to help us get from 1 to 10 a lot faster than if we were just trying to do it on our own. And of course, we provide investment money as well. But I think, that combination I found to be very helpful with early stage companies. So yeah, yes.
So let me ask the obvious question. The obvious question is, how do you go from 1 to 10? And that I'm sure we'll do that in 30 minutes. But I'm wondering, how do you in this new world of virtual and hybrid, how do you go from 1 to 10 when it looks like many of your employees are either not there or coming back or half are coming back, or we don't know?
Well, the toolbox is still pretty similar, right? In terms of how you build your business, you've got to have a really good product or service. You have to have clients that value that and want to pay you for it, and you've got to figure out a distribution platform that allows you to effectively and efficiently deliver that product. And a lot of the tools that we're using today in the remote / decentralized world that we're working in, they've been available for years. It's just the adoption of them. I, it's There's a lot more video today, a lot more Slack today, and I think figuring out how to engage each other, engage your customers in a more asynchronous fashion instead of being able to engage each other real time, I think is probably the biggest change in how we build businesses going forward.
Can you give us some examples of what you're doing with more of an asynchronous bent versus a synchronous bent?
Yeah, so I think for almost every portfolio company we have, they use a Slack channel. Everything sits in Google Docs, and you can watch each other edit real time on a document if you want. You can see where people have picked up and left off if it isn't happening together. We use also a fair amount of Zoom or other video. Did you ever think Zoom would become a verb so quickly? and and I think it's just the cadence has changed a little bit where you can't expect an immediate response, but you know you're going to get a response later that day on things that you're working on together. And so, what I've found through all this period of time is we've all kind of slowed down so that we can actually speed up. And what I mean by that is, I think about my schedule before, and I was fairly constantly going from one meeting to another. In my case, it was mainly on an airplane, but I was going from one meeting to another, and I was always on the go. And what I found since COVID is I've taken a step back, and a lot of my portfolio companies have taken a step back and thought about, okay, well, if we can't just all be together, what are those things that are really going to move the needle? And how can we really make sure that we really move those things, or that how can we really focus on those things that move the needle? Or to say it differently, how can we make sure that we really hit those KPIs that matter, or those main goals and objectives that really matter? And so I think it's forced all of us to take a step back and think about, okay, how are we really going to get there other than just getting everybody on the phone and talking all the time or by video? And so I think thinking through what we really expect of people and giving them those deliverables and then letting them figure out how to achieve them, I think has really made a difference. Or to say it differently, if you think back to a few years ago, we wanted everybody in the office because we wanted to make sure everybody was working. And I remember several years ago, when I was building my company Argo, I would always have a program in the summer that was a strategic planning meeting. And we'd always bring in different people to talk about where we thought the world was headed. And so for the last several years, we had a speaker or several speakers come in and talk about the future of work. And so this notion of going from worrying about people being in the office working to more outcomes based is something that we were already focused on at that company. And I think in the world we're working in today, most companies that have really kind of moved ahead in the post-COVID world, where they're working remotely or in a decentralized fashion, are if they haven't already, they're quickly becoming more outcomes based. Instead of just remember the old time and motion studies of the right? Those days are hopefully gone. But you hear stories today about how companies are trying to watch what their employees are doing by like having the camera on, if you can believe that, or watching the keystrokes on their keyboard.
Yeah, they're trying to take an old concept and apply it in a culture now that just it can't stand up.
No, at the end of the day, it'll never work. I
But
mean,
Mark, I have a more in-depth question for you. So how do you take that idea, that concept that we're concentrating on outcomes? And I have been very clear, or together we have been clear on what the KPIs are. How does that look differently than the way I managed before? With now you're remote or hybrid. How does that look? What, as a leader, what am I doing differently?
well, to the extent that you were already focused on outcomes before, you're not doing anything differently. But how many of us were really doing that? How many of us were reverting back to, sadly, the way the work environment we grew up in, which was more of that time and motion bit. And so I think that we're doing a better job today of resisting the temptation to say, well, what were you doing today? Instead of, hey,
Mhm.
can you tell me what you accomplished today?
There you go.
And so it's just changing the dialogue, right? To what did
You got it. Right.
so what did we accomplish, and also getting away from the what did we accomplish today to, hey, are we on our timeline to achieve our goals that we need to do in the next 3 weeks?
Exactly. Different language.
Different language. That's right. A different lexicon, but also making sure that the mindset matches the lexicon.
Oh, yeah. And chicken or egg, you got to keep doing it
That's
until
right.
they come together.
So Mark, you've pointed out something which I think is really important, and we've tackled this on our podcast, which is that getting your KPIs and getting your outcomes and getting your vision is so much more important in a hybrid, in a virtual setting. And it would be, I think what I'm reading from what you're saying is it would be a shame if we went back to a world where, okay, everyone's in the office. And so what's great is I can see everybody working. And we would actually lose that focus on the KPIs and the outcomes. Just wondering, what are some of your portfolio companies doing to keep those KPIs and objectives front and center?
Well, some of it goes back to the tools I was talking about a minute ago, but I think I think the cadence of the quick stand-up check-in meeting and having everybody quickly run through and just say what they're working on, not so they can say, yeah, I got my homework done, but rather so their colleagues know, because we're working in such interdependent teams today. It's a faster way of letting everybody keep up with what's going on with their colleagues so they know where they fit into that. And of course, we see that in various Slack channels for each project as well. But I think keeping those discussions crisp and short and to the point really make a difference. I've certainly jumped into a few stand-up meetings of my portfolio companies, and man, the pace is fast.
Mm-hmm.
And some people are on the video, some people are on the phone, some people are standing in the room, and it doesn't really matter where you are because the thing starts and it ends in 15 or 20 minutes max. And again, companies were doing this before, but remember the days of you'd come into the room and you'd sit and talk, and then you'd kind of get going, and remember when meetings used to get scheduled for an hour because you thought meetings were supposed to last an hour? Well,
Right.
it's amazing what you can get done in 20 minutes when you've only got 20 minutes. And by the way, if you only got 20 minutes, you need to be very concise and on point in what it is that you're saying to people.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mitch.
Yeah, no, what I wanted to say was it is having us be very, very taking the synchronous time and making it extremely valuable, right? As well as making the asynchronous time extremely valuable. So we're making sure that we're using our time wisely because we're focused on those KPIs. And I think also people are complaining about these back-to-back meetings. So I think what they're doing is they're saying, okay, if I'm actually going to get to you, on a video chat, it's going to be in, it's going to be out, it's going to be done, and we're out. And I think that's what you're pointing to, Mark.
There are times when I want to stare at somebody and I'm like, okay, let's Zoom, and we'll jump on for 10 minutes and boom, we're off.
Mhm.
But for people that you're used to working with, you can accomplish so much in an impromptu phone call. And the phone call, well, for me, because I've worked remotely for so long, the impromptu phone call for me has been the proxy for walking down the hall and saying, "Hey,
There
what
you
do you think
go.
about this?" or the water cooler thing. So
Yes.
you can remember when we were younger and we just call each other, right? We didn't have to plan anything. We just pick up the phone and say,
Right, and they were
"Hey,
there.
Jenny, do you have a couple of minutes? Can I ask you a question?" And we got programmed to over the last decade to say, "Well, I got a 3 o'clock and a 4 o'clock but I could fit you in at 5:15 for 3 minutes. Would that work?"
Mhm.
And I'm like, "No, just talk to me now. I just have one question." And so hopefully we'll get back to that again.
Yeah.
Mark, I love what you're talking about, because we really haven't had anyone emphasize in such an elegant way the piece about the concentration on the KPIs and how it changes the language and how it still is, how it needs to morph to run the business well. And perhaps this is just a question. The Zoom may evolve to being used for when you do want more of the social interaction. I'm just throwing it out there, as we keep using these different vehicles, because sometimes you do want to actually stare at the person, laugh, not have it be 20 minutes, and yet it's planned to be open and casual.
Yeah, absolutely. I just meant you shouldn't plan for every meeting to last an hour and have every
Right,
meeting be by Zoom. But
right.
there's absolutely a time and place for that, and it's what you just said, right? It's
Mhm.
it's if you're transacting with each other and you can't do it by Slack, then pick up the phone and get it done. But if you want to sit and talk to somebody and and do so in a creative way or an innovative way, then Zoom is much better than the telephone because you can see the other person's body language. By the way, I would say that it's a good substitute for being in person. But if you're really trying to sit and have a brainstorming session, there's still no substitute for being in person.
Well, Mitch and I have been exposed to a few of the online platforms that do encourage group brainstorming. They do, however, require an incredible amount of expertise.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to say you shouldn't brainstorm by video. I think that's mainly how we do things today. I was just saying, let's not forget being together is still kind of nice.
Yes.
It is kind of nice, right?
Yeah, sorry. I wasn't trying to suggest that that should be the priority still. I think we've all
Yeah.
proven that actually we can accomplish far more by video than we appreciated. But again, it's because it's now pervasive and it's now so much easier to use than it was pre-COVID. Let's not forget that.
So I've got okay. I want to get to the meat of the questions. How do you go from 1x to 10xing a company?
Well, let's start with every company.
Did you bottle that yet, Mark?
Yeah, I want to bottle that. I want to know. People
Yeah.
want to know.
Yeah, all right. So let's start with every company is a little different, but but every company has a lot of things in common, right? Which is, and I touched on these a minute ago, but they're worth kind of coming back to a little bit, and that is it starts with making sure you've got a great product or service that you've figured out that customers actually value your product and service. Okay. And so of course most businesses that get started, they get started because the entrepreneurs recognize a need that isn't being met by clients. And so they go about building what they believe is going to be a great product or service to meet the client's needs. But then you run into two challenges. One is that sometimes the clients, they don't know it. They're like, okay, I know I told you that this is my pain point, but I'm not sure that your product solves that. Or I'm not sure that I want to change my behavior, or I'm not sure I want to pay that little extra money, even though what you've built may be amazing. And by the way, their definition of a little extra is more than 10%, right? Until you get some believers. And let's say you get over that. you've then still got to figure out how to distribute your product and find even more customers than those first true believers. And so what I've found over time is that entrepreneurs, they can, so when they, to go from 0 to 1 means they've kind of figured out product, customer, and sort of distribution because they've got those first set of believers. But then they've got to figure out how to get that next set of customers. And so then sometimes that means augmenting the product. Sometimes that means finding a different set of customers and or completely revamping their distribution platform. Well, let me say one last thing. And they almost always underestimate the amount of money it costs to build a brand by a factor of somewhere between 20 and 100x.
Wow. And then you also have sometimes the replacement of the entrepreneur.
Well, so let's talk about that for a minute. And this is a challenge that all companies have, and it's certainly something that I've experienced as well. When I took over the company that I spent 20 years building, which is called Argo, I had invested in the company in 98. I joined the board in 99, and my colleagues on the board convinced me to run the company in 2000. That was never my intention. And it certainly wasn't my intention to run it for 20 years, but here's kind of what happened. We figured out what we wanted to be, which was a specialty company in the commercial insurance business. And we wanted to become one of the leading specialty underwriters in the US. And over a 4 or 5 year period, we accomplished that goal. And we had to really transform the company to do so, which meant bringing in a lot of different people. And we ended up reinventing the company several more times over the course of this following 15 to 16 years. And I remember getting some advice early on from one of my mentors, which is a business guru named Ram Charan. I'm sure you know him or know of him.
Yes.
And Ram and I were, early on in this process, he said, let me ask you a question. He said, do you appreciate that if you can't reinvent your company every few years, that the market's going to leave you behind? And I said, yes, I do. And he goes, okay, then do you appreciate that if you're successful in reinventing your company, that if you can't reinvent yourself, you're going to get left behind?
There you go.
And the answer is, I got it. And he goes, really? I'm like, okay, well, so he and I, still work with each other today. So I got it. But I can tell you that there were moments in time that we were so successful at reinventing the company that I was so out of alignment with my role that I thought, man, if I can't get this figured out in the next 6 to 9 months, we're going to have to get somebody else to do my role.
Right.
So the challenge that businesses have that are fast growing is bringing in the people fast enough to grow with the company, and the people who were there change themselves to grow with the company. Those are the challenges.
That's the culture part.
Well, it's also the wanting to change. Yeah, the wanting to change yourself part will be left behind.
What have you changed about yourself over the last 14 months?
Oh gosh. Well, I went from investor to operator back to investor. So that's been a fairly significant change. I think I mentioned earlier that I've, taken a step back and tried to be more thoughtful.
Okay.
I've reminded myself how important it is to be resilient. And I think if you look at the companies that are doing well, it's because they have been resilient, and not surprising, their leaders have been resilient in rebuilding their companies. But I think of all those things, I come back to what I said earlier, and it's just being more thoughtful about where we're really headed, being able to clearly communicate that to people so they understand where we're going, or where the portfolio companies are going, and just be really thoughtful about getting to the end game and letting other people get there, not trying to do it all, not trying to do it all yourself. Now, as an investor, when I was running my company, and once it got over $1 billion, it was really hard for me to direct behavior. I could only really influence behavior then, and of course, as an investor today, I'm influencing behavior more than I'm directing behavior. So a fair amount of change, but being resilient and thoughtful, I think, has been pretty helpful the last year.
Great. What advice would you give to business leaders? Let's say for the next part of this year. It's almost like 6-7 months left of this year. As we were talking on the phone before, as people go back, don't go back, kind of go back, kind of reinvent their companies, accept these new changes. What advice would you have for them?
Well, I kind of mused about that, when we first started talking about, we finally got used to a new normal, only to now realize we're going to have a new normal. And what I was thinking when I said that was, we have all these new tools. Well, sorry, the tools that were available to us, we've now refined. They work better today, and we've figured out a better way to use them. And I think that the challenge for everyone going forward is to take the best of what we've learned today. So outcome-based projects instead of thinking about how people spend time. There's an example. Getting comfortable communicating in an asynchronous fashion instead of always having to be together. Slowing down and being more purposeful. And then the last one, which we haven't really talked about too much, I alluded to it a minute ago, and that's making sure that leaders spend enough time clearly articulating where the company's going, why it's going. So you can call that mission and vision or why, right? But making sure people understand what the end game is, what their role is in getting there, and what the world's going to look like if they achieve the end game. And so focus more on the leadership than management. I think in the world we live in today, it's more important to lead than to manage. It's essential that you're more focused on leadership than management. But by the way, that means you have to have a team that buys into the mission and the vision and the culture that you've created at the top that allows that to happen.
Great. Yeah. I love this, this segment, because we've gotten really clear that perhaps what this pandemic has really, how it served us is to have us just get clear where we're going. Are we getting there? Why are we doing it? Well, Mark, thank you so much. Where could our listeners find you?
Best place to find me is on LinkedIn. So if you just go, in the search function and type Mark Watson and then Aquila, my venture firm, you should be able to get me pretty easily.
Great. And Aquila is Aquila, and I looked it up ahead of time. It's Latin for eagle, for those who don't know what an Aquila is. Yeah. Well, great. Well, Mark, this has been a great opportunity to
really interesting.
Hear how to really think about the future of business. I want to thank you. I know you're on your way to Austin, I think. And I want to thank you, Jenny Bianca Mathis, for this podcast. And so to all of our listeners, if you've loved this episode, please share this with your friends and colleagues. And we'll see you next time on our next episode of Team Anywhere.